Alright, what's up everybody? I'm back from vacation. I appreciate your patience waiting for my next video. So I've had this video planned out for a few days now, but to clarify before getting into the video, it's a video about what I hate about lifting and what I hate about bodybuilding. And I know it's social media. You don't talk about negativity, you don't talk about hate, but I feel there's a lack of realism, true realism, not just cynicism. But what I want to get at in this video are the things that I dislike about lifting. And it's not just to vent or complain about this thing that I'm very privileged to be able to do every day. It's to be relatable, to know that somebody like myself who basically does bodybuilding for their entire job, like this is what I do, this is what I absolutely love, even somebody like myself still hates a lot of parts of bodybuilding. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. I know it's social media, so either way, yeah, let's get to it. I'm pumped to be making another one of these videos. So let's get to it. I try to keep a cautiously optimistic approach throughout all my videos, but if there's one thing the fitness industry and social media in general lacks, it's genuine realism. Everything in life has a reward tied to a sacrifice. You're probably wondering what that has to do with bodybuilding, which I'll be going over in this video. If there's one concept that's truly stuck with me that I've learned from social media, it's that positivity can actually be toxic. And ironically, yes, I did learn it from social media. Anytime I hear a phrase along the lines of quote unquote toxic positivity, I immediately roll my eyes and move on, but I actually think there's some substance behind this concept, and I think it's worth discussing. So, how exactly does it tie to bodybuilding? First, think about the fitness industry as a whole. It's filled with beginners, with a lot of intermediate Dunning-Kruger victims too, lots of PED users as well, and the vast majority of these guys look advanced because of the PEDs, but have the lifting comprehension of a beginner, and haven't had to go through much struggle, because the hormones do the work for them. This isn't to dismiss enhanced lifters as a whole. I respect a lot of them, it's just the reality of the situation. If you divide the fitness industry into two camps, natural versus enhanced, you'd probably find that the results would be equal if you took away the PEDs from the enhanced lifters camp. If anything, maybe the naturals will actually be a little bit bigger, but that's not the point of today's video. Each side has a few lifters that are going to be genetically gifted and will succeed regardless within reason. A select few lifters that will grind it out and become advanced purely through proper training, knowledge, consistency, etc. There will be a bunch of lifetime intermediates, and the rest will be perma beginners for various reasons like inconsistency, unwillingness to get out of their comfort zone, etc. The difference here is that the enhanced camp is filled with beginners that look advanced because of the hormones they take, while the natural beginners stay small because training is their primary and only stimulus. Let's take a step back for a second. In the broad picture, the enhanced guys get more attention than the natural guys. The explanation for the algorithm's bias is extremely clear. I don't need to explain that. Social media, as a general concept, is an exchange between two camps, the provider and the consumer. If the largest creators of content are the ones who are enhanced, and the majority within that population only have a beginner level understanding of lifting due to the PEDs doing the work, what do they really have to offer? They've never been through the struggle of the journey of becoming an advanced lifter. Think for a second about how much that will skew the perception of what the journey of becoming an advanced lifter is to the consumers of the content. I did want to give a shout out to Barbell Apparel, channel sponsor. Right now, they have a free hoodie sale with anything that you spend 99 or more dollars on, and you can stack them as much as you want. So if you want to get, say, a pair of pants, a couple shirts or something that's $99 or above, you get a free hoodie with that. I personally love mine. It's the Break Boundaries hoodie in that rifle green. It's absolutely beautiful. It fits the colors that I love. So shout out to Barbell Apparel. Check out that sale if there's something you're thinking about getting. Get a free hoodie with it. When your lifting experience has been a cakewalk aside from some PED side effects, how exactly can you prepare your audience for the struggles that lifting actually brings? The reality is they can't, and it may not be from bad intent, it's probably from a genuine lack of awareness. If you don't know that something exists, how can you be aware enough to discuss it? Another example of the Dunning-Kruger effect, like I mentioned earlier. To expand on that a little, let's look at the consumers of fitness content. If the majority of them are beginners, there's a clear incentive for content creators to bias their content towards beginners. How often do we see this? You follow a small channel, as they grow, the more beginner-oriented their content becomes, and the more dumbed down it becomes too. A lot of the time, this is hypocritical because most of these people say that beginners can train however they want and still get results. So if these creators actually believe this, why do they make content for beginners? It doesn't add up. That's besides my point for today's video, but I think it's an interesting observation regardless. So now what? The main thought I want to get across in this video is that you will not be prepared for how difficult it is to become an advanced lifter. Like I said earlier, how can you be aware of something that nobody told you even exists? Today I'll be going over my own personal biggest struggles related to lifting that I've experienced. And some I do still experience and probably always will. I've spent some time reflecting on why my channel became successful, even with relatively boring content and low production quality. And this isn't in the script, but a very monotone voice. And the realization I had is that I talk about the psychological side of lifting that many other channels ignore, or aren't aware of, at least on a deeper level. Look at how I started my channel. I discussed my experience with power building, the big three, progressive overload, and other similar topics. These are all simple concepts. But why do people tune in when I talk about them? It's because the relatability and my understanding of the concepts as a whole from various perspectives, not just the black and white 2 + 2 = 4 approach. For a quick example, when I talk about preferring Smith bench to bench press, sure, the added stability is a nice little bonus, but it goes deeper than that. It's about how you approach the lift as a whole. It's about the pressure you put on yourself to chase performance or chase stimulus, comparing the two. It's about how that lift dominates the training session or how it allows for an equal distribution of mental focus across various lifts within a training session. And that's like not even scratching the surface of how deep I like to go into those topics. I used to talk about that kind of stuff all the time on the channel. I still do talk about similar concepts, but in different avenues, I guess. Those things I've got my point across, to say the least. I've successfully conveyed my experiences on a deeper level as a lifter, which is exactly my goal on this channel. Let's get back to the initial point of this video, the struggles of becoming an advanced lifter. You'll hear a lot of people say lifting is simple, just pick time-tested lifts and use progressive overload. I agree that's a reliable way to grow, but how can we explain why only a select few lifters ever become advanced? Is it really because of genetics or not understanding that basic concept? I'd argue most lifters never become advanced primarily because they lack awareness of the difficulties of lifting, and they lack general self-awareness on top of that. Most people don't have as much self-awareness as they think because we're, of course, biased towards ourselves for psychological self-preservation reasons. So if lifting is so easy, what exactly is getting in the way of these lifters who never become advanced, or let alone maybe never even make it to the intermediate stage? It's worth talking about because the lack of awareness and anticipation of the things that will hold you back will make them far more likely to hold you back, and the obvious solution to this is to simply become aware. So let me help warn you of the challenges you'll face throughout becoming an advanced lifter. I can really only speak on personal experience for this. Whether it's myself or observing other lifters or clients, that's really all I have to go off. There's no science for this, and most other YouTube channels won't discuss it either. Some of the downsides I'll be listing may contradict each other, but that's just because my perspective has shifted over time. It's a journey after all. The first challenge I want to talk about is complacency. This is one I've dealt with for years. It may sound obscure and out of the norm in an industry filled with eating disorders, PEDs, and body dysmorphia, but one thing I'm grateful that I've been able to keep in perspective is my initial goal physique, and I've been able to accurately assess my physique, at least to my own personal awareness. And while I've set new goals and my physique has become somewhat normalized in my mind, I've never been fueled by insecurity or a warped body image. I don't take that for granted, but it absolutely does come with its own disadvantages. Like I said at the start of the video, every reward has a sacrifice. It's genuinely difficult to try and get excited for a training session when you've reached your most desired goal. I'm not trying to say I'm a top bodybuilder or even entirely satisfied with my physique, but my excitement for lifting is nowhere near what it was when I first started. I've accepted and embraced the slow and steady, more stoic approach to bodybuilding, But if I wasn't aware of that and hadn't come to terms with the fact that what is basically my life passion is kind of numb feeling now, it might never be as enjoyable as it once was, I can easily see how that would lead me away from lifting and onto another interest. I've come to the conclusion that the experience I've had in terms of complacency would apply to anything, and I'm all right with mostly committing to the reward of mastery in one interest at the expense of novelty and excitement over the more constant excitement and novelty of taking on new interests every time I get bored and becoming a jack of all trades instead. So really, that's not all to say that I get bored with bodybuilding and I never want to lift or anything. It's just, it's not as exciting as it was when I first started. I think that's something we can all kind of relate to. And the training sessions are objectively more difficult and less comfortable now. Not that it's ever supposed to be comfortable, but it's lifting when you're strong and big is more of a challenge than it is when you're a beginner. And to kind of top that off, now I'm pretty satisfied with my physique versus when I was skinny, and the grass is always greener. So I was like, oh, well, being jacked will be the coolest thing in the world. And that's not to say it isn't, because I love being jacked, and there's a reason why I lift, have a YouTube channel about lifting, train people for my day job, and have sponsors for lifting clothes and a lifting app. Obviously, I love it, but just kind of that passionate excitement, it's not the same anymore because it is objectively more of a challenge. Another one I struggle with is that my future results are now fairly predictable, and I'm no longer driven by spite and self-doubt. This isn't something I've talked about a whole ton on the channel, by the way. There was a unique feeling of mystery when I first started lifting. A lot of it was self-doubt. I stuck with lifting to prove to myself that I actually could do it. I grew up skinny and poor around a bunch of genetically gifted peers from wealthy families that excelled in any sport they tried. I was convinced I just had bad luck, and I was fired up to prove that wrong. I lived my life with a chip on my shoulder, and this is really the first time in my life where I feel like I can take a breath and I feel like complacent and comfortable, and it is very strange for me. Not to get into my personal life much, so let's go back to the script. No matter how challenging it would be to get jacked, I was doing it out of spite for my situation. So now that that feeling is gone, and ironically, I'm now seen as one of those genetically gifted people, which is why I reject that idea for the most part, I do miss it in a weird way. I no longer have to prove myself. I've spent enough time lifting and involved in the industry to know what it is, to know what is and what isn't achievable naturally. I know fairly precisely how close I am to reaching what my potential is, and I know exactly how everything looks. The mystery is mostly gone, which does kill some excitement. That's the downside of following other people. The reward is that they'll show you what is possible and how to get there, but it might be at the expense of the mystery of what's possible. Like I said, rewards and sacrifices. Living vicariously through other lifters is another one I struggled with, particularly when I was a bit younger. I had a burning desire to lift, and the most frustrating thing about lifting is the fatigue cost and just how much that will hold you back. Think about any other hobby, at least for the most part, especially non-physical ones, or anything somewhat limited physically at least. You can go on like a multi-day backpacking trip. You can go golf for 4, 5, 6 hours, spend entire days becoming entrenched in your interest of choice. With lifting, you've got an hour a day, maybe a little more. So when you have an obsession for lifting, you're going to be all fired up with nowhere to go the vast majority of your time. One of the only things that can scratch that itch is, very exciting, watching other people lift. Even informative lifting content is ultimately still entertainment at its core, or at least that's why lifters watch it in most cases. The reward of this is you get to learn a ton about lifting, but the expense it comes with is it's a fine line between entertainment and living vicariously through other lifters. So when your favorite lifter posts a training vlog, how much of it is motivating, and how much of it steals your own desire to go lift afterwards? With some self-reflection, you may find you're more excited to watch the lifter you follow lift than lift yourself. They're probably more advanced than you, they have a better physique, go to a better gym, better looking, better genetics, better situation overall, better environment. So it really is more appealing than going to the gym you hate with your subpar physique in comparison. Another one that's bittersweet is having a much more comprehensive understanding of lifting and knowing what does and doesn't work. And I realize a lot of this, I'm not going to be able to think of the right word, but a lot of this sounds like Okay, first world problem. This is a good problem to have, and I agree. But this is just to voice the sacrifice that comes with these incredible rewards that I'm lucky to be able to reap. So don't get me wrong, I have a lot more to learn, and assuming you know everything is a quick way to stall out. But there is something I miss about not knowing as much, at least outside the basic common sense variables. There is a degree of mystery and excitement to experiment. Ultimately, this will hold you back more often than not, but there's something nice and kind of magical about wondering if there was something out there that could skyrocket your progress. Knowing what does and doesn't work also narrows your options a bit. If I know that stable, generally length and bias lifts are best for hypertrophy, that kind of limits my options. Not to say anything else wouldn't work, and of course this is a good thing overall, but the expense of this is a hesitation to venture into other experiments. I don't really have a takeaway for this point. I just wanted to warn that once you know what you're doing and you have a fine-tuned training philosophy, it does become a little bit more mundane. Knowing there's no magic program is another one. Although it's fairly similar to my last point, for any beginners or teenagers out there, my best advice is to truly come to terms with this. Truly come to terms with that, seriously. Always try to improve your training program in reasonable ways, but it's better for your results to commit to something mundane than it is to have undiagnosed shiny object syndrome and spin your wheels. It's fun to have that mindset in the short term, but long term, the gains you make will be more enjoyable. The most difficult one to admit to myself is that lifting drains my energy. It isn't nearly as bad in times of high motivation because there's less mental resistance that I have to fight throughout the day to get to the gym. But when my motivation is high, I'm less likely to spend that energy elsewhere, and I'm more interested in doing other lifting related things or watching lifting content. I also can't help but think that the people who say lifting gives you energy are either not training hard or just earlier in the process they accumulate less fatigue from their sessions. I really wish this one wasn't true, but I've definitely found that my energy levels are higher on off days, and my attention to detail and interest in day to day life is higher on off days or prior to lifting and vacations. Of course, part of this is fatigue management. I get it. Yeah, take your deloads, don't do overkill volume, leave a rep in the tank, whatever. But a lot of it really is just the reality of being strong and advanced. Again, every reward has its cost. Ultimately, I'm far more fulfilled when I'm lifting and look like a bodybuilder than when I'm not lifting and have a bit more energy for other things. I learned this lesson when I took 6 months off of lifting during basically after my power building phase, and it really was the period of time that cemented me as a lifter for life. That's all I've got for today. I hope it was helpful for anyone who wanted to know some of the downsides of pursuing lifting beyond the beginner and intermediate stage. The pros outweigh the cons, made obvious by the fact that I keep lifting. But being aware of these things is what lets you accept and come to terms with them. If you don't know that becoming a serious lifter has its own costs, you're more prone to letting them knock you off track. The secret to becoming a successful lifter isn't to ignore these negative thoughts and hide them in the back of your consciousness. It's to fully accept that they're there and embrace the fact that as difficult as they are, there is a reward that overrides them. And if you follow that philosophy, you'll become an elite lifter eventually.